The rain had been falling since before dawn, and the man who stood at the door of the wash-house was soaked to the bone and asking for nothing. Bess Holloway saw him through the steam of the copper, a tall shape in a plain brown coat, hat in his hand, water running off him onto the flagstones. The other women had already turned their backs. A steward, someone said, come up from the new master to count the linens and the candle ends, and stewards were not to be fed. Bess wrung the gray water from a sheet, and she looked at the way his shoulders had gone still against the cold, and she thought of nothing at all, except that he was wet, and it was morning, and there was bread. She did not know that the man in the brown coat owned the roof over her head, the copper she stood beside, the very flagstones beneath his ruined boots. She did not know that the season had already decided what she was, that a woman in another house had already decided what he must become, or that the smallest thing she was about to do would be the thing that undid all of it. You may see it coming before she does. Stay with her a moment longer, because she is about to do the bravest ordinary thing in this whole story, and she will not even know she has done it. She crossed the wash-house floor and she pulled the low stool from beneath the shelf, and she set it near the fire where the warmth pooled. "Sit," she told him, in the voice she used on the boys who came in frozen from the yard. There was bread from the morning, a brown loaf gone a little hard at the crust, and she cut the heel of it thick and pressed it into his hand without ceremony. "Eat," she said. "You will catch your death standing there dripping like a gutter." The man looked at the bread in his hand as though he had never been given anything before. For a long moment, he did not sit. Then he sat, slowly, the way a man sits who has forgotten he is permitted to, and he ate the hard bread by the fire while the rain came down, and he watched the laundress go back to her copper as if she had already forgotten him. His name, though she would not learn it for some weeks yet, was Adam, and he was the 6th Earl of Raymere, and he had come home to a house he had not seen in 11 years to find out what manner of place he now owned. He had not meant to lie. He had meant only to arrive quietly, ahead of the carriages and the announcements, and to walk his own land as a plain man walks it, before the whole county arranged its face for him. When the head groom took him for the expected steward and called him by that office, Adam had let the mistake stand. It cost him nothing, he told himself. It would last a day. It would tell him what a lord is never told. What he had not counted on was the wash-house and the fire, and the woman who fed a stranger she had every reason to ignore. Bess was 26, and she had been at Raymere for 9 years, and she had buried her mother in the churchyard below the West Field, with her own 2 hands helping the sexton because there had been no one else to pay. She remembered the weight of the spade and the coal that had come up out of the ground, and the way the sexton, an old man named Yardley with no teeth and a kind manner, had told her to rest, and she had not rested, because to rest was to feel it, and she had not been able to afford feeling it. She was a laundress, which in the ledger of the great house was very near the bottom of the ledger, below the kitchen maids, and the dairy women, above only the boy who carried the ash. Her hands were raw at the knuckle from the lye, and the winter water, and in the coldest weeks they cracked and bled, and she bound them at night with strips of the same linen she washed by day, and told no one, because a laundress with ruined hands was a laundress soon replaced. Her gown was gray where it had once been blue, and mended at the elbow with thread that did not match, and the hem had been turned up twice and let down once, and she knew every seam of it, the way a soldier knows the field he has held too long. She had a small square of window in the wash-house, through which she could see one bare autumn tree, a hawthorn that had lost its leaves early, and she had taught herself long ago to be content with the one tree, to watch it green and bare and green again, and call the watching a life, because a woman with nothing learns to be rich in small things, or she does not survive at all. The house above her had changed hands that summer. The old earl had died without warning in his London chair, and the title had gone sideways and northward to a man no one at Raymere had ever seen. A soldier, they said, back from the wars. With a limp he hid, and a silence he did not. The servants' hall had talked of nothing else for a month. Would he keep the household on? Would he marry? Would he shut the house and go back to the city and leave them all to the parish? Bess had listened and said little. Whatever the new earl decided, a laundress would still have sheets to boil. That much did not change with the name over the door. To the household, she was just the laundress, and the word carried its whole meaning in the way it was said. She heard it that first week from the housekeeper, Mrs. Aldous, a hard, capable woman, who was not cruel so much as tired, and who said it as she said all things. As a fact, that closed a door. The steward wants the linen counted, and you will let the laundress do it, for she has nothing better to occupy her. It was not meant to wound. That was the part that wounded. Bess counted the linen, and she folded each piece with the care she gave to everything, and she told herself the care was its own reward, which was true, and which was also the kind of truth a person tells herself in the cold. Adam stayed on at Raymere in his brown coat and his borrowed name for 3 days, then a week, then longer than he could account for. He told the steward's story so well that he half believed it. He rode the boundaries. He looked into the state of the cottages on the low farms and did not like what he found. He learned that the old earl had let the roofs go, that 3 families were a season from ruin, that the home farm was bled to pay for a chandelier in a London house Adam had never entered. And every morning, whatever the weather drove him to, he found that his boots carried him past the wash-house, where a woman with raw hands and a mended sleeve worked without complaint, and spoke to him as though he were a man and not an office. She did not flatter him. That was the thing he could not get past. Every soul at Raymere who knew him for the steward treated him with the small, careful deference owed to a man who might report them. And every soul he had known in his other life, the London life, had treated him after his brother died with the terrible soft handling owed to a man who is lost. Bess treated him like neither. She told him he tracked mud. She told him the tea was strong because she had no more leaves, and he might drink it grateful or drink it elsewhere. She asked him, one gray afternoon, whether stewards were paid enough to eat because he was too thin for a man who counted other people's candles. And there was in the question no pity at all, only a plain and practical concern, the concern of a person who had known hunger and did not think it a thing to be delicate about. He found himself telling her things he had told no one, not the truth of who he was, only the truth of what he carried. It came out sideways, on a gray afternoon, when the rain had kept them both indoors. He pretending to check the count of the linen, and she wringing and folding without pretending anything. He told her without names that he had lost a brother to the war, and that the brother had been the good one, the easy one, the one their father had meant for everything, and that he himself had come home to a life cut to another man's measure. He said it looking at the fire, and not at her, in the voice of a man setting a weight down carefully because he is not sure the floor will hold it. Bess listened with her arms in the wash-water, and did not offer him comfort, which he had learned to dread, and did not tell him it would pass, which he knew to be a lie. She went on folding. When she had folded the last of the sheets, she wiped her hands on her apron, and considered him the way she considered a stain, to know whether it would lift. She said only that a coat cut for another man could be taken in, if the man wearing it stopped being ashamed of the needle. She said her own mother had been a seamstress before the coughing took her strength, and had told her that there was no garment on earth so wrongly made that a patient hand could not bring it round, and that the same was true of a great many things that were not garments. Then she told him to move, because he was blocking her light. And he moved, and he thought about the coat and the needle for the rest of that day, and a good many days after. What Adam did not tell her, what he had told no one, and carried like a stone under the ribs, was the shape of his particular grief. His brother Henry had not died gloriously. Henry had died of a fever in a foreign town, 3 weeks after the fighting stopped, alone, because Adam had quarreled with him before he sailed and had not written, out of pride, out of a young man's certainty that there would be time. The letter Adam finally sent had arrived after the burial and had been returned unopened, and Adam had carried that unopened letter across 2 countries and kept it still, folded in the breast of every coat he owned, the plain brown steward's coat included, a square of paper worn soft as cloth. He had come to Raymere in part to escape the rooms where people knew to be gentle with him. He had not expected to find, in a wash-house, the first person in 2 years who let him be simply cold and hungry and human. Above stairs, the house had other plans for the Earl of Raymere, and the house did not yet know he was already living in it. The plans belonged chiefly to Lady Coleridge the Dowager, the late Earl's sister, who had appointed herself the guardian of Raymere's dignity in the absence of anyone to stop her. She was a woman of considerable understanding and no imagination, which is a dangerous combination. And she had understood at once that a soldier earl with a neglected estate and no wife was a problem requiring management. She had summoned her goddaughter from Bath. She had aired the best bedrooms. She had let it be known, in the careful way such things are, let be known that when the Earl at last presented himself, he would find everything arranged, including the woman he was to marry. The woman was Miss Adela Pruitt, and she was not a foolish creature which the story owes her. She was clever and cool and beautiful in the particular finished way of a woman who has been told since childhood that she is the answer to a question, and she had come to Raymere prepared to be the answer. She wore ice blue and pale rose. She played the pianoforte without error and without warmth. She was, Lady Coleridge said often and with satisfaction, exactly what the house required, and Miss Pruitt believed it too, and neither of them was cruel in the way that requires malice. They were only certain. They had a script that had worked in every house they had ever entered, and they had no reason to think it would fail in this one. Twice in that fortnight Adam had passed them without their knowing him. Once in the long gallery where Lady Coleridge had been directing the hanging of a portrait, and had looked straight through the brown coat as though it were a draught from a window, and had told the footman that the steward, when he came up from the Low Farms, was to use the servants' passage, and not the gallery, for the gallery was for the family. And once in the garden where Miss Pruitt had been cutting the last of the roses with a pair of silver scissors, and had asked him, not unkindly, but without any real seeing, whether the Earl's rooms were being properly aired, and had turned back to her roses before he answered, because the answer of a steward was not a thing that required attending to. Adam had answered anyway courteously and had gone on his way, and had thought that a man learns more of a house in the coat of a servant than he could ever learn from its head of the table. They knew the Earl was expected any day. They did not know he had already been among them for a fortnight in a brown coat, learning that his housekeeper was overworked, that his tenants were cold, and that the laundress in the wash-house had a way of tilting her head when she was deciding whether to tell you the truth or spare you. The turning came on a raw morning in the 3rd week, and it came, as such things do, through a child. There was a boy at Raymere named Tom, 8 years old, the son of a dairywoman. A quick, bright, ragged thing who ran the yards and stole warmth where he could find it. He had taken to the wash-house because Bess kept the fire and did not send him off, and he had taken to the steward too, trailing after the tall, quiet man on his rounds. That morning Tom had knocked a jar of Lady Coleridge's imported preserves from a pantry shelf, a stupid small accident, and Mrs. Aldous, harried and afraid of the Dowager, had raised her hand to him in the passage. Bess, coming through with an armful of linen, had put herself between the woman and the child without a word, and taken the blow that had been meant for him across her own forearm, and had stood there holding the linen and the boy both, and had said, quite calmly, that the jar would be paid for out of her own wages, and there was no need to strike a child over a thing that could be counted in shillings. Adam saw it. He had come in at the passage door, and he saw the whole of it, the raised hand, the woman stepping in, the boy's face, the red mark rising on the raw forearm that was already raw enough. He saw her offer her wages, which were nothing, to spare a child, a beating. And he saw that she did it without any thought of being seen, because she did not know he was watching, and because being seen had never once been the point. Something in the Earl's chest that had been closed since a foreign town 3 weeks after the fighting stopped came open a little way, and it hurt, the way a hand hurts when the feeling comes back into it. He did not speak. He turned and went out into the cold and stood a long while by the one bare tree, and he understood, with the plain force of a thing that cannot be unknown, that he had found in his own wash-house the only honest measure of worth he had met since he came home, and that she believed herself worth nothing, and that he had it in his power to tell her otherwise, and had not yet dared. That night, for the first time, he took the worn brown coat off, and held the unopened letter in his 2 hands, and did not put it back. The next weeks were a slow accumulation of small proximities, and the accumulation had a weight the season could not measure. He found reasons to be where she was. He carried the heavy copper for her when the fire was too hot at her back, and pretended it was nothing, and she let him, and their hands touched once on the iron handle, and both of them went still, and neither of them spoke of it. He learned the particular sound of her step. He began to know, without turning, exactly where in the wash-house she stood, the way a man knows where the warmth is in a cold room. She told him about her mother and the churchyard and the one bare tree, and he told her about his brother's laugh, which he had not been able to describe to anyone, and found he could describe it to her. Once when she reached past him for the drying rack, he caught the scent of lye and wood smoke, and something underneath it that was only her, and he stood with his hand half lifted toward the line of her jaw, and he did not touch her, and the not touching was louder than any touching he had ever done. She felt it too, and it frightened her, because she knew what she was and what he was not, and even a steward was a station above a laundress, and she had learned long ago not to want what the world had already refused her. Her heart betrayed her at his nearness in ways her hands could not hide. When he laughed, which was rare, something in her chest turned over. She caught herself listening for his boots. She caught herself, one evening, wanting to tell him a thing she had never told anyone, that she had once meant to be a schoolmistress, that her mother had taught her letters by firelight, that she had a mind the wash-house had never once had use for. She did not tell him, and yet she wanted to, and the wanting was a new and dangerous country, and she stood at the edge of it, and did not cross. I will not pretend she did not know the danger. She knew it. She only found, that autumn, that she could not quite make herself afraid of a man who ate hard bread by her fire, and asked her nothing she could not give. If her courage moved you, stay to the end, for it is repaid. Then she went back to the sheets, because the sheets did not wait. The reckoning began the day the Earl was to be revealed, and Adam had chosen the day himself, and even he did not fully understand why he had let it come to this. Lady Coleridge had planned a harvest supper in the great hall, the whole county invited. The house opened, for the first time since the old Earl's death, and it was to be the stage on which the new Earl of Raymere at last presented himself, and the Dowager intended, all but announced his engagement to Miss Pruitt. Adam had received the invitation as the steward received his instructions, and he had said nothing, and he had let Lady Coleridge believe her Earl would descend the great stair. That evening, a stranger to them all. She was right about that much. He would be a stranger. She had merely mistaken which stranger. The day itself, however, brought the thing Adam had not planned, and it brought it again through the laundress and the child. It happened in the forenoon with the house in the chaos of preparation. Miss Pruitt had come down to the still room to see the sugar work, and Tom the dairy boy had been underfoot, and there had been an accident with a tray of glasses that were meant for the Earl's table. The glasses were the old Earl's crystal, and they shattered, and in the wreck of it, a great deal of blame needed a place to land. Lady Coleridge arrived to find her goddaughter distressed, and the boy cowering, and she did what her whole life had taught her to do. She looked for the lowest thing in the room to carry the fault. She found Bess, who had come running at the crash, and had gathered the frightened child against her gray skirts. The dowager's voice, when she was certain, was a thing of polished edges. She said that this was what came of letting the scullery run tame through the house. She said the boy was a thief's get, and the woman no better, a drab from the wash-house who did not know her place, and never had. Third time now the household had heard the word laundress made into a verdict, and this time it was flung in the open hall with the county's servants listening at every door, and it landed the way the dowager meant it to land, as a closing of every door at once, Bess stood in the middle of it with the child against her and the broken crystal at her feet. And she did not weep, and she did not argue, because she had learned that arguing with certainty only feeds it. She only held the boy, and she looked at the floor and she waited for it to be over the way she had waited out every cold winter of her life. Lady Coleridge, satisfied, ordered her from the house. Not merely the hall, the house and the wash-house with it, and the cottage below the west field where she had buried her mother turned out, before the supper, so that no shadow of the scullery should fall across the Earl's first evening. One? It was done in an instant, in the way that only the great can do a thing in an instant. And Miss Pruitt did not stop it, and Mrs. Aldous did not stop it, and the county servants looked at their shoes. Bess went. She gathered her few things into the one bundle she owned. She wrapped the chipped brown bread bowl that had been her mother's, the bowl she had cut 100 loaves in, the bowl from which she had fed a cold steward on a rainy morning, and she wrapped it in the gray-gowned spare. She walked out through the wash-house one last time, and she banked the fire out of habit, because a fire left burning was a danger, even the fire of a house that had cast her out. She stood a moment at the small square window and looked at the one bare tree. Then she went down the drive in the falling light with her bundle on her arm, and she did not look back at the house, and the man who owned it did not yet know she was gone. He learned it an hour before the supper, and the learning of it changed everything. He had been in the steward's small room, putting on for the first time in a fortnight the clothes of the man he truly was, the dark coat, the white linen, the boots that had never seen the low farms. Tom found him there. The boy had run the whole way, wild with it, not understanding why the quiet steward should be dressed like the gentry, but understanding that the steward was the only grown soul in the house who had never once failed him, and he poured out the whole of it, between sobs. The crystal and the dowager and the word she had used, and Bess sent down the drive in the dark with her mother's bowl in a bundle. Adam listened, and his face, which Bess would have known was doing the thing it did when he had decided something, went very still. He did not run after her. That is worth marking, because a lesser telling would have him run. He did something harder and colder and more complete. He finished dressing. He became, fully and at last, the Earl of Raymere. And he walked up the great stair and into his own hall where the whole county waited to meet a man who had already been living among them, and he let them see him, and he watched the recognition move across their faces like wind across a field. The grooms and the maids and Mrs. Aldous and Miss Pruitt, and last of all Lady Coleridge, who understood before any of them, because she was clever, exactly what she had done, and to whom she had done it in front of the hall had gone entirely silent. Candlelight moved on the old crystal and the long table and the ranked faces. The dowager rose from her chair with the fan still in her hand and began in her polished voice to welcome her nephew home, and Adam let her get 3 words into it before he spoke. "Where is the woman you turned out of my house tonight?" He said it quietly, in the level voice Bess would have known, the voice that derived its whole authority from restraint. And the hall heard it, and Lady Coleridge's fan stopped moving, and the certainty that had carried her through every house of her life met for the first time a room where the script did not work. She tried. She was not a small opponent, and the story owes her that. She spoke of the scullery of standards of what was owing to his name and his table and his guests. She spoke of Miss Pruitt, arranged so carefully at his right hand in ice blue and pale rose, and of what the house required. Adam let her finish because he would not match her cruelty with his own, and when she had finished, he did not raise his voice at all. He said that the laundress had given him bread and a chair when he was cold, and a stranger and worth nothing that anyone in this hall could see, and that he had come home meaning to learn the measure of his own house, and that he had learned it and that the measure was her. Then he named the thing plainly. Once, in front of the county and the candlelight and the woman in ice blue, in 11 words that could not be taken back. She fed a stranger. I mean to spend my life thanking her. The silence after held for the length of a held breath. Miss Pruitt, to her lasting credit, was the first to understand, and something crossed her cool, finished face that was not anger, but a kind of recognition, the look of a woman seeing, perhaps for the first time, that she had been an answer to a question no one had truly asked. She rose, and she inclined her head to the Earl with perfect composure, and she said in a voice pitched for the hall to hear that she found she had no wish to marry a man whose heart was already spent, and that she wished him joy of it. It was gracefully done. It removed her from the field, with her dignity intact, and it left Lady Coleridge standing alone in the ruin of a plan that had worked everywhere, but here. The dowager sat down. She did it slowly, and her hand shook on the fan, and for a moment the polished edges were all gone from her, and there was only an old woman who had staked her whole understanding of the world on a certainty that had just failed in front of everyone she knew. She was not destroyed. Adam did not destroy her. He said only, still quietly, that his aunt would of course remain at Raymere as long as she wished, and that he trusted she would come in time to know the woman he had chosen as he knew her. It was mercy. And it was also the completest possible correction, because it left her to live inside a house whose true order she had failed to see, and to learn it day by day, at the hand of the laundress she had cast into the dark. Then the Earl of Raymere left his own supper untouched on the table, and took a lantern from the hall, and went down the drive in the falling dark to bring home the only person who had ever fed him for nothing. He found her at the churchyard below the west field. She had not gone far. Said she had stopped at her mother's grave, because a woman with nowhere to go goes first to the one place that is hers, and she was standing among the leaning stones in the last gray light, with her bundle at her feet and the chipped bowl unwrapped in her two hands, holding it the way a person holds the one thing left. She heard the gravel and turned, and she saw a gentleman coming toward her with a lantern, dark coat and white linen, and boots that had never seen the low farms, and for a moment she did not know him at all. Then she did. Then she knew him, and the knowing went through her like cold water. Everything at once, the brown coat and the hard bread and the hand that had half lifted toward her jaw and never landed, and she understood who she had been feeding all those gray mornings, and her face did the thing a face does when it has been asked to hold too much. He stopped a little way off, as though he understood that to come closer too fast would be a kind of trespass. He said her name. Not Miss Holloway. Her name, the given name, Bess, spoken in his voice for the first time, and it landed in the churchyard silence with more weight than any title he owned. He told her he was sorry. He told her what he was plainly, the Earl, the fool who had let a mistake stand because it let him be a man for a fortnight, and he told her that he had not meant to deceive her, and had ended by deceiving only himself, because the one true thing in his whole homecoming had been the fire and the bread, and her. Bess held the bowl and looked at him, and the old caution rose in her. 9 years of it, and she said the thing she could not have said to him a month before, when he was a steward and safe. She said that she was a laundress, that her hands were ruined, that she had a gray gown and a mother in the ground, and nothing else in the whole world, and that a man like him did not get to come down a hill with the lantern and undo what the world had spent her whole life teaching her. Her voice did not break. That was the worst of it. She said it as a plain fact, the way she said all true things, and it was the nearest she had ever come to naming her own wound aloud, and having named it, she stood very straight and waited for him to see the sense of it and go back up the hill. He did not go back up the hill. He crossed the last of the distance between them, and he did not take the bowl, and he did not take her hands, which were full. He stood close in the cold, close enough that she had to look up, and he said that he had spent 2 years being handled gently by people who knew what he had lost, and that she was the first soul since his brother died who had looked at him and simply given him what he needed, without weighing what it would cost her or what it might buy her. He said that this was the only wealth he had found worth anything at Raymere, and that he had no intention of walking away from the single honest thing in his life, to please a hall full of people who had cast her out. He said that if she sent him back up the hill he would go, because he would not be one more high-placed person deciding her life for her. Still, he asked her not to send him back. He asked it as a man asks, not as an earl. And Bess Holloway, 26. raw-handed, standing among the stones with her mother's bowl in her arms, felt the whole cold architecture of her caution meet a thing it had no defense against, which was a person telling her the truth. She looked at the bowl. She looked at the man. She thought of the rainy morning and the wet shoulders, and the way he had sat down slowly, as though he had forgotten he was allowed. And she understood that she had already, without knowing it, on that first gray morning, chosen him. In the plainest way a person can choose another, by feeding him when he was nothing. She did not say, yes. She said in the voice she used on cold boys and hungry strangers, that he was letting the lantern gutter, and that a man who could not tend a flame had no business out of doors after dark, and that he had better come out of the cold before he caught his death. It was the same thing she had said to him on the first morning, or near enough, and he heard it, and something in his face came all the way open at last. He took the lantern from where it hung and steadied it, and she wrapped the bowl again in the gray cloth and settled it on her arm, and they walked up the hill together in the dark, not touching, the way they had not touched all autumn, but walking now at the same pace toward the same house, which was, though she was only beginning to believe it, to be her house too. They were married in the small church below the west field before the first snow, and not in the great hall which was Bess's wish, and which Adam granted without a moment's argument, because he had learned that the truest things at Raymere happened in the small places, and not the grand one. She wore not ice blue nor pale rose, but a gown of soft green that Adam had ordered made, without telling her the color. Having noticed that she always turned toward the one green thing in any room, she carried no diamonds. She carried, at her own insistence, a sprig of dried hawthorn from the tree outside the washhouse window, and the vicar, who was old and had known her mother, spoke the words slowly so that she would hear each one, and she did hear each one, and she thought of the churchyard a stone's throw off where her mother lay, and she did not weep, because this was not a grief, but the mending of one. Lady Coleridge attended. She sat near the front in her good gray silk, and she did not smile, but she came, and that coming had cost her something the whole county could measure, and Adam marked it and said nothing, which was its own kind of grace. In the months that followed, she was seen more than once in the kitchen passage speaking to the dairywoman's boy without raising her hand, and once near Christmas she was found by a housemaid teaching that same boy his letters from a horn book, gruffly, as though it were a chore she had been assigned. Miss Pruitt sent a letter of good wishes from Bath, cool and correct, and in its last line, unexpectedly warm, saying that she had come to think a house was a poor prize beside a heart already given, and married the following spring a man who suited her, a widowed physician, with clever hands and no title at all, and was by all accounts content. The wash-house fire went out for good the day Bess left it, and it was not lit again, because there was a new laundress engaged at proper wages, and a proper roof, and the woman who had banked that fire 100 times had no more need of it. The copper, though, was not thrown out. Adam had it moved, at some expense, and to the bafflement of the household, into a corner of the morning-room where his countess liked to sit, and there it stood, scoured and useless and dear, and no one but the two of them ever fully understood why. Winter came on hard that year, and the snow fell as it does on the low farms, softening the leaning stones in the churchyard, and the roofs of the mended cottages, and the one bare tree outside the wash-house window, that no one worked in any more. On the first true night of it, the Earl and Countess of Raymere sat by the fire in the small parlor, and the boy Tom was asleep on the hearthrug, where he was now permitted to be, and the house was quiet around them, in the deep way of a house at rest. On the low table between them, holding a few late apples from the home farm, sat a chipped brown bread bowl, old and mended and worth nothing that anyone in any hall could see. Adam Raymere reached across and took his wife's raw hand in his, and turned it, and pressed his mouth once to the ruined knuckles, and did not let it go. Outside, the snow kept falling. Bess watched the fire, the apples, and the sleeping boy, and she thought, as she thought most evenings now, that the world had been wrong about her for 26 years, and that one cold morning she had fed a stranger a heel of hard bread, and it had turned out to be the whole of her life. She did not say it, She only closed her fingers around his raw hand and warm one and let the snow come down on the house. It was at last and past all doubting her own. Thank you for staying with Bess until the end. If her one small kindness moved you, I hope it stays with you the way the cold stays out of a warm room, quietly, and for a long while.